The year is 1969. America is a nation deeply divided. The Vietnam War rages on, and protests have erupted across the country. Richard Nixon, the newly elected president, comes into office with a promise of peace with honor. He knows the American public is weary of this seemingly endless conflict. The body bags, the draft notices, the astronomical costs, it all has to end. But how? How do you pull out of a war without admitting defeat? Nixon and his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, devised a strategy they called Viet. The concept was simple on paper. Gradually withdraw American combat troops and simultaneously build up the South Vietnamese military, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or ARVN, so they could take over the fighting themselves. It sounded like a logical, responsible exit plan. The American boys would come home, and the South Vietnamese would be empowered to defend their own nation. Nixon began the troop withdrawals almost immediately. By the end of 1969, tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers had left Vietnam. To the American public, it looked like the war was finally winding down. It felt like a light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel. But the reality on the ground was far more complicated. The policy of Vietnamization was built on a shaky foundation. Could the ARVN truly stand on its own against the battle-hardened forces of North Vietnam and the Viet Cong? From the very beginning, there were serious doubts. For years, the ARVN had been plagued by systemic problems. Corruption was rampant. Leadership positions were often given based on political loyalty rather than military skill. Ghost soldiers, who existed only on payrolls, were a common way for corrupt officers to pocket extra cash. This created a military that was, in many areas, a hollow shell. Then there was the issue of morale and unity. Many ARVN soldiers felt little loyalty to the corrupt and unstable Saigon government. They were fighting for a cause that many of them didn't fully believe in, while their opponents, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, were fueled by a powerful sense of nationalism and a clear objective to reunify their country under one flag. Desertion rates in the ARVN were alarmingly high. How could an army with such deep-seated issues be expected to suddenly become a formidable fighting force, capable of holding back the tide of communism? The United States poured billions of dollars into the effort. They supplied the ARVN with modern weapons, M16 rifles, helicopters, artillery, and tanks. American advisors worked tirelessly to train South Vietnamese troops. On the surface, the ARVN looked more powerful than ever, but equipment can't buy fighting spirit. You can't train away systemic corruption overnight. One of the fundamental flaws was the Americanization of the ARVN's tactics. They were trained to fight a conventional war, reliant on massive air power and logistical support, just like the U.S. Army. But this was a model that South Vietnam, a much poorer nation, simply couldn't sustain on its own. It made them dependent on a level of support that wouldn't always be there. While publicly championing Vietnamization and troop withdrawals, Nixon and Kissinger were secretly pursuing a much more aggressive and controversial strategy. They believed that to give South Vietnam a fighting chance, they had to cut off the enemy's supply lines. The main artery for North Vietnamese supplies flowing into the south was the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a complex network of jungle paths and roads that ran not through Vietnam, but through the neighboring officially neutral countries of Cambodia and Laos. Nixon made a fateful decision. He authorized a secret bombing campaign in Cambodia, codenamed Operation Menu. Starting in March 1969, American B-52 bombers began pounding suspected enemy base camps and supply depots along the Cambodian border. This was a secret war. The American public didn't know. Congress didn't know. Even many high-ranking officials in the government were kept in the dark. The bombing was incredibly intense. Over the next 4 years, the U.S. would drop more bombs on Cambodia than the Allies dropped on Japan during all of World War II. The goal was to destroy the enemy's sanctuary, to disrupt their ability to launch attacks into South Vietnam, and buy more time for Vietnamization to work. But the secret wouldn't stay secret forever. In April 1970, Nixon took an even bigger gamble. He announced to a shocked nation that American and South Vietnamese forces were launching a ground invasion, or incursion, into Cambodia. His justification was to destroy the headquarters of the Viet Cong, which U.S. intelligence believed was located just inside the Cambodian border. The public reaction was explosive. too many. It didn't look like an end to the war. It looked like an expansion of the war into a whole new country. The invasion of Cambodia set off a firestorm of protest across the United States. College campuses, already centers of anti-war sentiment, erupted. The most tragic of these protests took place at Kent State University in Ohio. On May 4, 1970, National Guardsmen opened fire on a crowd of student protesters, killing 4 and wounding 9. A few days later, at Jackson State College in Mississippi, police killed 2 more student protesters. These events horrified the nation and deepened the divisions in American society. The country felt like it was coming apart at the seams. Militarily, the Cambodian incursion had mixed results. U.S. and ARVN forces captured huge stockpiles of enemy weapons and supplies. It did disrupt the North Vietnamese logistics for a time, but they never found the mythical jungle headquarters of the Viet Cong. And the long-term consequences were disastrous. The invasion destabilized Cambodia's neutral government, creating a power vacuum that was filled by a brutal, radical communist group, the Khmer Rouge. The American bombing and invasion drove many Cambodians into the arms of the Khmer Rouge, setting the stage for a genocide that would kill millions just a few years later. The war was spreading, not shrinking. The following year, in 1971, the strategy was tested again. This time, in Laos, Operation Lam Son 719 was designed as the ultimate test for Vietnam. This time, American ground troops were forbidden by Congress from crossing the border. The plan was for the ARVN to invade Laos on their own, with only American air support, to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was supposed to be a showcase of the ARVN's new strength and capabilities. It turned into a complete and utter disaster. The North Vietnamese army was waiting for them. They had anticipated the move and had heavily fortified the area with anti-aircraft guns and dug-in troops. The ARVN's advance quickly stalled. Their columns were ambushed, their tanks destroyed, and their helicopters shot out of the sky by the dozens. The operation turned into a desperate retreat. Television cameras captured harrowing images of panicked ARVN soldiers clinging to the skids of American helicopters to escape the carnage. It was a humiliating defeat and a clear, brutal demonstration that, despite all the money, equipment, and training, Vietnamization was failing. The ARVN, on its own, was no match for the North Vietnamese army. Despite these setbacks, the withdrawals continued. Nixon's priority was political. He had to get American troops out before the 1972 presidential election. The slogan, "Peace is at hand," became the mantra. Back in Paris, Henry Kissinger was engaged in secret peace negotiations with North Vietnamese diplomat Le Duc, though. They were inching towards an agreement, but major sticking points remained. The North demanded the removal of the South Vietnamese government, something the U.S. refused to accept. The U.S. demanded the return of all American prisoners of war. As the negotiations dragged on, North Vietnam decided to force the issue. In the spring of 1972, they launched their biggest offensive of the war, the Easter Offensive. This wasn't a guerrilla campaign. This was a full-scale conventional invasion. Waves of North Vietnamese tanks and infantry poured across the border, smashing through ARVN defenses. The very survival of South Vietnam hung in the balance. For a moment, it looked like the end. Nixon responded with overwhelming force, but not with ground troops. He unleashed the full might of American air power in an operation called Linebacker. B-52s carpet-bombed North Vietnamese positions in the south, and, for the first time in years, conducted sustained bombing raids on North Vietnam itself, hitting targets in the capital, Hanoi, and mining the harbor of Haiphong. The bombing was devastating. It halted the North Vietnamese advance and inflicted heavy casualties. The ARVN, with the crucial help of American air power, managed to bend but not break. They eventually rallied and, by the fall of 1972, had pushed the invaders back. The Easter Offensive was a bloody stalemate, but it changed the dynamic. It showed North Vietnam that they could unwin a quick military victory as long as American air power was in play, and it showed the United States that the ARVN couldn't survive without it. Both sides were exhausted and ready to make a deal. Just weeks before the U.S. presidential election, Kissinger famously announced, "Peace is at hand." A ceasefire agreement seemed imminent. This period, from 1969 to 1972, was one of the most complex and contradictory phases of the Vietnam War. On one hand, it saw the steady withdrawal of American soldiers. fulfilling Nixon's promise to end America's direct involvement. On the other hand, it saw a secret, massive expansion of the war into Cambodia and Laos, with devastating consequences. Vietnamization, the cornerstone of Nixon's policy, was exposed as a deeply flawed strategy, creating a South Vietnamese army that was dependent on American air power for its very existence. The stage was set for the final, dramatic chapter of the war, but the path taken had only widened the conflict, destabilized the region, and left behind a legacy of destruction and unanswered questions. Thank you for watching. If you found this history insightful, please like this video and subscribe for more chapters in this series.